Hi everyone, welcome to the new Cloud Academy's webinar. Today we have the pleasure to have Evgeny Rudinsky from Russia, and we're going to talk about data backup and disaster recovery with AWS. Evgeny, how are you today?
Hi Diego, I'm very good, thank you. And yeah, thanks very much for inviting me, for sharing, that type of knowledge that you mentioned already. How you doing, Diego?
I'm very good, and I'm very happy to have the opportunity to watch your presentation today. Just to give you a little information about how I met Evgeny. So we started collaborating for the meetup that he runs in St. Petersburg in Russia. The meetup is about AWS, and then we are very happy to have this collaboration going on. So the session is all yours, Evgeny.
Yeah, thanks very much, Diego, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us today, and once again, thanks for Cloud Academy for, joining me today and the opportunity to talk about data backup and disaster recovery with AWS. So just a little bit about myself. I'm actually, one of the 1,000 guys in Russia who are interested in AWS services, and some time ago, myself and a few of my colleagues just decided to launch the AWS user group. So the group is quite successful. So we meet quite a number of people, sharing knowledge, talk to each other, sharing different recipes around AWS services, and so on and so forth. And so, as Diego mentioned already, by day I work for a company called CloudBerry. So CloudBerry is one of the AWS partner in the storage competency network. So the company provides tools for backup and file management. And again, by night, what I do is actually run that user group for AWS in Russia, in St. Petersburg. So originally I'm from St. Petersburg, located in that beautiful city. Also, I do some blogging around AWS cloud services, around UX and UI design. I do like coding Ruby on Rails and things like that. So this is kind of area of interest what I do. And well, I've actually spent around, well, not really quite 10 years, but I'll definitely, yeah, it's getting to the 10 years right now, maybe that next year. I've been working for different, for different areas, covering backup and recovery challenges. So essentially, backup vendors is somewhere where I've been for the last 10 years. And so the idea to run that webinar is just to share with people the collection of recipes and collection of approaches that we may want to apply to AWS services in terms of backup and recovery strategies and challenges. So let's kick off and talk about the AWS things. First of all, I just want to highlight some of the key storage services that we're going to cover today. So you probably have heard about those services already. I'm pretty sure that most of you have used those services and maybe using right now, having them in your organizations or in your personal usage. So essentially, I'm going to talk about all these storage services like EFS, Glacier, EBS volumes, S3, and some other things that we may apply to those above services in terms of making life easier, making data transition faster, seamlessly, and so on and so forth. I also want to highlight a very good course. I actually seen lots of people, especially in our company, learning this course and actually going through that course. It's a Cloud Academy course about AWS fundamentals. I do suggest you to go over this course and take a look at the AWS services. It's not that really complicated. You just get a really high-level overview of the services, and you'll be more familiar what we're gonna be talking about today. It's just in case if you're not really familiar with all these abbreviations that you can see on that screen. Okay, so let's move on and let's talk about the very first thing that we have from the storage perspective in AWS. So essentially, it's Elastic File System, right? So it's quite new service. It was introduced some time ago. I think it's like in 2015 or 16. Don't really remember exactly. Essentially, it's the way to mount the file system to our compute instance. Initially, it was designed for EC2 instances, so we can work with Elastic File System over NFS protocol, and it actually provides us the all the standard operating system mount commands. So we just need to run the NFS client on our computer, and we can get access to this endless file system where we can keep everything that we want. And one of the key ideas here for Elastic File System is the way to map that EFS massive array to multiple EC2 instances across our infrastructure. Just in case if we keep any data which is being used by multiple instances, or in case if we keep mission critical data that are in use by multiple instances, and so on and so forth. The other thing is that we can mount the Elastic File System to our on-prem data center server, so that can be done through the VPC, which is attached through direct connect mechanism to our on-prem data center. So we can talk to Elastic File System and make this hybrid workflow. So that's great. The technology is great, but the price. So the price is 30 cents per gigabyte per month. So that's the amount that we're going to pay for data utilization on that storage. So that's great, probably for really important backups. Like for the backups that are required insane quick access to, or those backups intensively used by our systems. But taking in consideration what I've seen for last number of years, I haven't seen people using massively Elastic File System for backup. So let's just move on and talk about something else. So Glacier. Glacier is one of the most popular service in AWS from the storage perspective. So what it does for us? So essentially, Glacier is very, first of all, very secure, durable, and low-cost storage. So when I say low cost, it's probably one of the cheapest ways to keep our data. Is really cheap, like 0.004 per gigabyte per month. So it's just really nothing comparing to the EFS. And so Glacier, essentially, Glacier is just really similar to what we have on Prime as a tape facility. So I would suggest consider Glacier as a very good cloud-based alternative to tape facilities that we may run on Prime. And essentially taking in consideration different backup strategies and different backup approaches. So Glacier is more like a long-term backup strategy. So when we want to keep data for for many years, and we don't really think that we will get to that data in following months or so. So it's just, for example, we may need to get to access to this data, let's say in 3 years or in 5 years. So Glacier is actually a very good thing here. So the other thing is that, like when we talk about the placing data in Glacier, that's fine. So it's really cheap, but what about restore? So starting last year in 2016, so Glacier actually changed slightly from the restore, from the retrieval approach. So right now, what we have here is called expedited, or standard, or restore in bulk. And before that, we used to have something else. Not something else, but we used to have standard retrieval approach, which is the need to wait 3 or 5 hours just before we get access to our recently offloaded data. Right, and so that was a bit complicated, and sometimes customers become confused about that time of retrieval wait. I think that's why AWS introduced expedited retrieval for Glacier, when we can list the data and within a few minutes can get access to recently stored data. So it's quite costly. So right here in that slide, you can see a link to a certain web page on AWS pricing section where you can compare different retrieval options. Yeah, by the way, we're going to share the content, and I believe the session is being recorded. So the ability to review and to replay the webinar is possible later. I believe Cloud Academy team will do that shortly after the webinar. So moving forward, and let's talk a little bit about elastic block storage. It's not really, it's kind of thing that we usually see in EC2 instances. Essentially, it's a block storage that we use for, let's say, install an operating system, that we use for like root volume, for example, or we use EBS for attaching new volume to our compute instance. So it actually gives us the ability to create file system on that volume that we can use for different workloads, like we can keep applications data, run applications on top, and so on and so forth. So elastic block storage, again, is probably similar to EFS from the backup strategy and from the backup selection perspective. Well, it's possible, but I don't know, like if you really want to pay that much for keeping your backup data. Again, on that slide, you can see like samples of pricing that you may get from the EBS volumes. And yeah, as elastic block storage comes in 4 different options. We actually have 2 different sections, so like SSD and HDD, and in each section we have different type of volumes that we can provision as well. So moving forward, I just want to quickly jump into the questions box. I think there are some questions, really quickly. So there is a question about the price, which depends on the region. Yeah, so there are some major groups of prices, but essentially, yeah, so there is a difference. So check your region, the region that you work in, and compare the price. But I live in Europe, well, I live in Russia, and so what I have is actually, I have AWS region in Ireland, in London, in Frankfurt. So my first meeting in European AWS region was Frankfurt, I think, Dublin, Ireland. And I think across Europe, so the prices are pretty the same. I may be wrong, so you may better check it. So there is a question: can we store a snapshot backup? So it actually depends, but yeah, if I can get some, some further details about that question, I can answer that definitely. So what's the difference between EBS and EFS? So essentially, EBS is something that you can attach to EC2 instance, install operating system, and you can use EBS volume as root volume for, let's say, again, for install an operating system, where EFS is kind of file share. So consider EFS as file share that you can mount over NFS protocol, so keep in mind NFS protocol, and through that NFS protocol, using standard operating system utilities, you can get access to that NFS array and keep your data there. So let's get back to our presentation, and a simple storage service, also called S3. I believe it's one of the most popular service in AWS. And I think many years ago, when I first met AWS as cloud provider, my experience started exactly from S3. This well, storage is actually, you know, the S3 is storage, right? And it's very simple, affordable, you know, cost-effective storage, object storage, where we keep our files. So when we talk about S3, we actually talk about again object storage, and each file is actually an object which is kept in bucket. So we have actually bucket, so that's actually a specific term for S3 service. So bucket is kind of isolation of your files within AWS S3, you know, clouds in your certain account. So there are some, you know, limitations across S3 buckets. So the bucket should be unique across all regions, and so don't try to call your bucket like test. Simply, it's not going to be possible because the test is might taken by someone else. So there might be there is limitation in terms of the number of buckets that you may want to get in your account. I think it's 100, but you may request more. Yeah, and so there are some things about the objects, but the object that you actually keep in the bucket. But we're going to talk about that just in a few minutes. So S3, right? So from my perspective, S3 is one of the you know, key service for backup purposes, and I see that you know, I see that widely used by organizations. So people keeping their backups, people keeping their you know, assets in S3 buckets, and you know, there is really very low price, even taking in consideration the 11.9 durability and 99.99 availability of the data that we keep in the bucket. We still pay really low for gigabytes, so it's 0.004 per gigabyte in the bucket for the storage utilization. And again, so that price is actually taken from the pricing table. It's for Glacier storage class. When we offload data in standard way, we actually get the standard storage class. We're going to be talking about standard and different other classes just in a few minutes. But you know, the Glacier storage class can be you know, applied to the object, and we may get the price like 4. You know, 0.004 per gigabyte. So moving forward, and let's take a look quickly at this particular, you know, diagram that we can see. The comparison between you know, storage classes. So you probably expected to see something else here, like the transition of the storage classes for certain objects, but I just decided to go differently. So we actually see 3 major, you know, comparison sections. So the first one is actually price. So the price for keeping data in gigabytes. So from left to right is standard, infrequent access, and Glacier. So obviously standard is the most expensive from the S3, and the infrequent access allows us to cut cost by, you know, by 50%. So we may you know, make the you know, like the price per gigabyte less than you know, twice less than just the standard class. And again, so the storage class Glacier is just the last point where we want to apply to our object. So Glacier actually, again, similar to you know, to the Glacier service. So it's actually a big difference, right? So the Glacier as a service and Glacier as a storage class, and the price here is really the same. So for the Glacier storage class, we see that it's like 4 or even like 5 times less than just a standard storage class. But the other thing is that we need to keep an eye on the lifecycle transition. So lifecycle transition is actually the way to you know, to move the storage class of the certain object from, let's say, standard to infrequent access and further to Glacier. So when we pay less for the storage class, so we actually pay something for lifecycle transition, and so we count that per 1,000 requests. So like each request is, you know, considered like a single object or a single file, in the S3 bucket. So that's just pricing for making the lifecycle transition. And retravels. Again, I mentioned briefly on the Glacier site, on the Glacier slide when I was talking about different retrial options. So on the right comparison, like retravels and gigabytes, we actually see the comparison between infrequent access and Glacier. Again, those two classes are great when you don't really consider to use your backup data quite frequently. So what we suggest to do is just consider a standard class for short-term backup, and then transition your short-term backup files, like elder points, for example, into infrequent access, and further, if you need to keep that for a long time, like for long-term backup strategies, just migrate them to Glacier storage class. And again, just keep in mind that pricing for storage and then lifecycle transition and retrial options for all these storage classes are different, so you may want to play with these combinations. So yeah, versioning. So we're getting closer to the real things about backups. So well, what backup? So backup is actually the way to retrieve your data in case of accidents, right? And I may have changes applied to my files, and obviously if I do the, let's say, inline backup for those files or systems, I want to get and see different versions of those files. And so one of the embedded capabilities that we see in S3 is called versioning. So all buckets are coming with disabled versioning. So if we enable versioning, anytime when we upload similar object into S3 bucket, we actually get a copy of that bucket. Not exactly, but we get a copy of that object. Sitting separately in the same bucket. So, so with versioning enabled, we may need to keep an eye on the capacity that we allocate by our data. Because again, so if we talk about, let's say, files which is 1 megabyte, we uploaded that 1 megabyte first time, and then we made some changes to that file. We start to upload that file again. So that's going to be another megabyte in the S3 bucket. So that's going to give us 2 megabytes in total afterwards. But again, if I want to keep versioning, if I want to get point-in-time restore, I may want to enable version, and I may want to play with, and find the middle between price, budgets, and the requirements that I have in my organization. So there is a question: is there an automatic policy in order to migrate data from S3 to Glacier, or it should be requested by the client? So yeah, that's a very good question. Thanks. For certain buckets, you can actually apply that policy. You can define number of days when the data should migrate to certain storage class, and then to next storage class. So for example, you may want to to enable the entire picture for the bucket when new data should sit in the standard class, and then after 30 days, this data should go to infrequent access, and then after another 30 days, which is 60 days in total, the data should go to Glacier class. So this is pretty standard request, and so AWS offers that capability either through web interface or through the AWS CLI and SDK, so you can actually play with that. So transfer acceleration. So we're getting closer to the case where we, let's say, talk about massive amount of data, and so there is need to deliver that data to S3. And transfer acceleration, I believe, is quite new service. So transfer acceleration leverages the edge location in AWS regions. I think it's over 50 for now across the globe. Edge location is just a like a service, like technical facilities from where your data can be either cached for for transferring back to the destination bucket, or edge locations are being used by CloudFront service. So CloudFront is just another service. We don't really discuss it today, but essentially it's the way to cache your data across the globe, so people from Australia can get access to your content if you store that content in Europe, and they don't really experience they won't really experience the log latency, the problems with getting access to that data, because the first time when the data is being touched by certain customer is going to be delivered to edge location for caching, and the second attempt to get access to that data is being taken from the edge location. So leveraging the edge locations across the globe, we may want to enable transfer acceleration and deliver our backups to the certain bucket. Instead of direct upload, we can do that over edge location, so that's going to give us much better performance. And I suggest you to have a look at the tool, which is Accelerate Speed Test. It actually gives you the idea how fast you can get your data uploaded to a certain bucket. And keep an eye on the additional cost that you're going to pay for that. So it depends on the region, from 4 cents up to 8 cents per gigabyte. So that's how much you're going to pay for your accelerated data. So multi-part upload. Thanks, Jeff Barr. I'm really a big fan of his blog. So for those who don't know who is Jeff Barr is the major guy from my perspective in AWS from the evangelizing perspective. So I would like to read his posts and getting deeper into the technology of AWS and what exactly it does. So unfortunately, I stole that picture from Jeff Barr's blog post, and so that was done in 2010, but it's still applicable in terms of technology and what it gives us so far. So in 2010, AWS introduced multi-part upload, and what it actually gives us, the way to in general to handle large objects, right? So when we have, let's say, over 100 megabytes object, and we don't really have quite stable internet connection, and we start to offload the data, but somewhere in the middle the process failed. So multi-part upload, which was recently introduced, helps us to divide the the file into chunks, and upload them in parallel threads. And so initially that was great for cases like with slow internet, but I think a bit later that was a great idea to handle large objects like up to 5 terabytes. And right now, if we see that limitation in AWS S3, which is 5 terabytes, it's just because we can divide our object into 5 gigabyte with which is the max chunk size, with 1024 threads, so we can offload that file. So that's going to give us that possibility. Yeah, so the other thing is that we can apply multi-part uploads for the objects that are from 5 megabytes up to 5 terabytes. So that's quite important, especially if you work with like SDK and if you want to enable the multi-part upload. Okay, so moving forward, and let's talk about the other thing which helps us to deliver data to S3 bucket faster. Is a Snowball. I know there is also Snowball Edge and Snow Mobile, but we're not going to talk about those things today. So I just want to give you an idea of what Snowball is and how it helps you to deliver your data. So essentially, it helps you to bring your on-prem data to AWS region, to S3 bucket over, like let's call it network attached storage that you receive from AWS team. So they send it to you on site, and you attach it to your network, and then you start to offload your data to that Snowball. So I just want to highlight two things. So at the position where I work right now, we meet quite oftenly people using Snowball, and so from AWS there are two interfaces, so two actually major technologies available for the upload. So the first is Snowball client. It's just a command line interface that you need to enable on your computer. Can be Windows, Mac, Linux. I probably tried, Windows only. I haven't tried Linux and Mac. Yeah, I need to check that, but at least I've seen Windows client for Snowball. So essentially, it gives us the way to communicate with the Snowball. So Snowball actually requires you to have unlock key and file manifest, so that can be taken from your AWS account when you get your Snowball on site and when you start to configure that. So don't worry about that. They have very detailed instruction. So all you need to do is either get the Snowball client, or there is new thing which was introduced recently. It's called S3 adapter from Snowball. Again, it's just back to my previous slide talking about Multipart upload supported. So the Snowball now supports almost all technologies from S3 perspective, from S3 API perspective. And when you receive Snowball and get access to your Snowball over S3 adapter, you actually can start working over AWS CLI or over, let's say, SDK that talks to your Snowball over, certain APIs that AWS has in the SDK for the certain language. So there is a question, Snowball, how secure our data? I believe your data is being encrypted by industrial encryption standard 256, and in transit at rest, you may want to enable additional encryption to your files, just in case if you want. And everything that you do is actually handled over your interface, over your control panel. So you get your unlock file, unlock code and the file manifest, which is available only for you. And when the data arrives back to AWS region, to the data center, it's just gonna handled by those keys. So I think it's completely secured. But if you want, you can raise that question and maybe get answered from AWS team. I think they have some certain points about the encryption and the security of your data in AWS Snowball. Thank you for question. So storage gateway, we actually are getting closer to a really interesting part where I'll talk about quite famous recipes. Some of the recipes I've done myself. I think we still have a few slides left, and then we'll go to the practice mode. So the storage gateway is the other service that we may see in AWS. I actually met that service about 5 years ago when I had some challenges to deliver data using the VTL supported backup product. And actually storage gateway gives that capability. Actually, it's one of the capability it gives. So essentially, so what it gives us. Storage gateway, you enabled in AWS region, in AWS account as the backend, and on your prime data center, you download and install the applines. So I actually had personal experience with VMware virtual machine appliance. I think they ship it in the template and OVF file. So you just get it and deploy a new virtual machine on top of your ESXi or workstation or whatever you have. And over that appliance, you get access to your AWS storage services. And so from the AWS perspective, there are Amazon Glacier, Amazon S3, and I think there is also Amazon EBS volumes supported from the storage gateway. And the storage gateway comes in 3 different options. One of the ways is actually cache volume. The other one is stored volumes, and the other one is VTL that I just recently mentioned. So the cache volume allows you to to cache your data, and all this the overall idea of the storage gateway is to arrange the capability of hybrid clouds. So you can attach your AWS facility, your AWS services into your on-prime data center, and partially use storage facilities and other facilities, for keeping your data. So if you want to get more details about that, just don't hesitate to visit that storage gateway link. Okay, so there is a question. I just want to go quickly. How to attach Snowball to our server and export data to AWS? Well, so Snowball is the network device. So you get it, you receive it from AWS team, and I believe there is RJ45 interface available. So you just plug it to your network, over a switch or whatever you have, or even directly to your computer. And then you just make your task, say, through the Snowball client or through the Snowball S3 adapter. So there are two native interfaces available at least. But if you want to use something else, like you may want to search for third-party tools that providing Snowball integration. Thank you for the question. Is there any way, so there is another question, is there any way to access static website hosted in S3 over that IP-based access, like from IAM role through bucket policy? Interesting question. I would suggest to clarify a little bit because I don't really get it. File data, SQL, Oracle, VMDK, VHT, etc. can backup to AWS, no data type limit to backup to AWS. So that's right, yeah, so there is no limit. So consider about 5 terabytes limit for single object, and that should be handled over multi-part uploads, but I don't see any problems. Even I understand like your VMware VMDK files or VHT files from Hyper-V might be really huge, so don't worry about that. You can, fulfill that data into S3 or even Glacier or S3 with different storage classes. Is there any AWS service support package where they design help in designing one's AWS solution? I believe yes, they have something, but again, if you want really to utilize AWS services, I do really suggest you to to deep dive for, at least to get familiar with all the services for, the most important services they provide, and Cloud Academy is actually one of the entry point to that world. So backup and recovery. So that's an interesting topic, and actually that's a key point. That's a key topic for us today, right? What we have so far. So we have all these great integration methods with all the services that I just go through, again, S3, Glacier, EBS volumes, EFS, storage gateway, Snowball, transfer acceleration, multi-part uploads, and all these kind of things. So all these are features or services that's very good. So what they offer so far? So they offer either CLI, like command line interface, for getting integration with all their services, or it's a great and really wide platform with different languages, which is called SDK. So there's C#, Ruby, Python, Node.js, and things like that. So we see all these supports in SDK, and there are lots of libraries available. So you can get integration with them. However, when we talk about really robust and ready-to-go solution like backup and recovery solution, I think even AWS team suggests to take a look at the endless number of third-party tools available from Amazon Partner Network, which is called APN, and I actually put the link right here, so you can just take a look at different solutions available from the backup and recovery perspective, just in case if you want to get something automated, something specific to your service, and something which is going to work on schedule basis with support, etc., etc. However, this is not really all. So this is not like I talk about Partner Network. I prepared something for you, which is what might give you some ideas how you can start to protect your on-prem data, or even data which is in AWS, for example, in EC2 instances. And all that I am going to do here is going to be based on AWS CLI, or command line interface. So far it's available for all major platforms. For Windows, Mac, Linux. I actually personally use Linux, and if we jump quickly here into the, I want to make it a little bit more bigger. So that's my command line interface, and if we do this, let's say if we do this, so we're gonna see the help, really huge help about the different options, different services that I can work with from AWS perspective, and all what I'll show today is actually going to be addressed to S3, and we'll also quickly cover RDS later. So what is AWS command line interface? So essentially, it's just a a set of tools that you enable in your computer, and from command line you can get access to your services. So for example, we can do this. If we do AWS space S3 ls, we're going to get access to our S3 facilities, and we're going to see all available buckets in my particular data center. If I do this, S3, for example, Cloud Academy S3, I can list the entire content which I have in my Cloud Academy bucket. So that's pretty simple. But it's not about that. Let's just go back to our slides and talk a little bit about the things that we can do even today. So yeah, by the way, the AWS CLI should be enabled, and it's super easy to enable. You just need to follow that guide, and so that's it. So that's going to give you AWS CLI available on your computer, and you can start to play with different services from the backup perspective. Yeah, so one of the things that I actually didn't mention, and I should do that right away, right on the first slide of the webinar, it's actually IAM, or Identity and Access Management. So essentially, it helps us to enable control across our users and roles. And so essentially, it gives us the way to control different people who have access to AWS services. So the IAM role is configured, or IAM user is configured by applying the certain policies. So the policy is actually JSON-like structure where we define certain services or its parts that we want to make available for that user. And from there, we can actually start to manage our services. So for our today's session, for the few slides that I have still left here, we will need to play with access and secret key, which essentially the AWS user with programmatically APIs enabled. So we actually, if you have experience with AWS IAM role, IAM service, when you create user, you actually prompted to download a CSV file, or you can copy and paste it from the panel. So that's actually what we need, access and secret key pairs. Okay, so a few examples really. Again, apart those network with different available solutions, what I really want to offer here, give you an example of file level backup. So for that, what we will need, we'll need AWS account with IAM user, S3 bucket, cron table. So cron, for those who don't know what is that, it's just a scheduler. Essentially, it's the way to run on certain basis different tasks. It's a pretty basic and really old command from the Linux CLI, from Mac CLI essentially. And next we need AWS CLI enabled on our computer, and then we just need to get a little bit understanding of Bash. So that script actually gives me the way to simply copy certain data from my local computer, which is my path to my files and asterisk, and then I put the path S3:// and then the bucket name. I can actually go through there and I can define a certain subfolder within my bucket. So that's going to be my very decent simple script that I want to launch on certain basis via cron, or that can be done by something else. So that file is going to take all the files from that folder, and that's going to upload to the bucket. So now, from the AWS perspective, what we may want to do here. So we may want to enable versioning, just in case if that's going to be exactly the same file coming into the folder, or we apply changes to that file. So having versioning enabled, we're going to have that file uploaded, and we're going to have multiple versions of that file. So that's going to give us a really great backup. So that's going to give us the backup of that certain file. And again, so we run that by cron. So we do that on certain basis, and that's going to generate multiple versions in the S3 bucket. We may want to do some some additional things like pre or post script just to clean up the folder, just in case if you want to work with new objects. I actually seen that approach quite frequently with different databases. For example, Oracle, Postgres, MySQL. So I see people doing dumps of their databases, structures, and data. So they dump this data to a certain folder, and then they handle this information by cron by that bash script, which is going to deliver that information to that bucket. And again, if versioning enabled, that's great. We're just going to have ability to restore to point in time from our S3 bucket. Just really quick example. I know that's sounds so decent, but again, just why not? It's great backup. Another one, we actually try that. I mean, there are lots of products that doing that. But if you want to take a look what it does and what exactly, how exactly your computer can look like on AWS, you can actually try these two things. So I actually call it like AMA generator or Amazon Machine Image Generator. So just using command line interface, what we can do, we can generate Amazon Machine Image right in the AWS interface, right from the command line, interface, so we can place it directly to AWS account. And for that, we just need one of the supported disk file. It can be OVI, which is a template of virtualization, can be VMware, like a ESXi workstation, or it can be Hyper-V. So it depends on your technology. You may want to do that. So you generate OVA file, or you may work directly with virtual machine disk files like VMDK or VHD, or even flat raw files. So just get access to those files, upload them to S3 because we're gonna need them, and that's just gonna give you the ability to import your image using the Amazon EC2 part. So it's another command from Amazon CLI. And that's going to create a image for us. So essentially, image. What is image? Image is the template, right? So a template that describes what are the settings for operating system, what are the settings for volumes, what is different other things around the further instance that we're going to create. We can actually customize that during creation, but for that example, we just use really default settings of the template. With the following configuration. So having these three strings, these two strings, like the first one, because the second one just allows me to check the task, and I can get access. I can actually get the response from AWS about the status of the import. Essentially, I'm talking about the first line, second line, which is import image, and EC2 import instance. So these two lines allows me to deliver my on-prem instance, like VMDK or any other type of disks, deliver and instantiate the EC2 instance. So essentially, I can do kind of P2C migration, like physical to cloud migration. I can try my instance, my computer, how it's going to work in EC2 environment. And I can do that by these two just lines. You may want to apply that to some other conditions, like if you want, you can automate that, and you may want to automate the creation of VMDK or VHD or any other type of disks, and then deliver that to S3 bucket, and then from there you can instantiate the image, and then from there you can instantiate the instance. And again, that's going to be just done by these two lines. So you may have you may be confused a bit. What is the file? I just want to show you quickly what is the file. So if we do that, and that's actually the description. So it contains the description of my further Amazon machine image. So it actually tells me that that's going to sit here in that bucket, and the S3 key that we're going to use is actually that VHD file, and that's why we put that VHD format right here. So that was restart of Windows 2008 VHD file. So essentially that was 2008 R2 on-prem machine, and we just made a PHP file. We actually just take PHP file of that computer, place it to S3 bucket, and then using that JSON file and the AWS CLI, we instantiated the IAM image, and then we created instance from that IAM image. Think about that. I think that's actually really nice way of integrating and making some kind of even disaster recovery strategy. Okay, last but not least, really, I've been playing with a relational database from AWS, so they have RDS, and so essentially, what is RDS? So RDS service supports, today Amazon Aurora, PostgreSQL, MySQL, MariaDB, Oracle, and Microsoft SQL Server. So I've been playing with Microsoft SQL on Prime. And I was trying to think about, what if I leverage RDS? Because RDS actually is a database in the cloud, right? So you get an endpoint. You don't have to care about the, the maintenance of that database. You don't have to care about the availability of that service. Actually, it's handled by AWS team. So all we get is actually, number of control things that you need to set up before you launch the RDS, and then you get an endpoint to get access to that RDS. And I was thinking about, like, what if I can use my on-prem data from Microsoft SQL Server using native backup and restore support and restore approach that is going to generate a BAK file for me. What if I can do that? What if I can restore that data into RDS? And it's possible, yeah, it's possible because it's actually even documented in RDS samples. So by having that approach, so you're going to go to Microsoft Management Studio, launch that particular number of lines, and that's going to instantiate a database right from the .bak file in your RDS instance. So that's great. It's just another example how you can actually leverage S3 technology, your on-prem services, and AWS things from the backup and disaster recovery perspective. Okay, just before I go into wrap up, I just want to quickly jump into questions. Okay, can we use IAM role to restrict access to static website hosted on S3? If you want to restrict access to static website, I think it's better to work in the buckets settings where you can actually deal with the bucket policies by setting to whom should be bucket accessible and what sort of files should be accessible, and we can actually play with that right there. There's another question. Any agent needs to be installed in company service to back up to AWS? Just need a storage gateway appliance in company to back up to AWS? Well, it's an interesting question. It depends on the case. Storage gateway is probably one of the easiest way to deliver AWS services, especially S3 and Glacier, to your on-prem facilities, so you can get direct access over that appliance to your, to your accounts, storage things like S3 and Glacier again. But again, there is CLI available if you're not really comfortable to work with CLI or SDK. You may want to take a look at the third-party tools, and I believe all those tools are based on agents. I might be wrong. Well, again, yeah, it depends on the data that you back up. So I've seen a number of agent-led solutions for virtualization, but it's different stuff, right? It's different top. So you may have virtual machines on top of VMware. Then you leverage vSphere API for data protection, just to get access to your data, like retrieve AMD files, etc. And then you just push them towards AWS S3 or Glacier. So that's possible, but again, it's all about third-party tools. So just really quickly wrap up, and I'll get back to those questions that we have in Q&A box. So all I've spoken today is, again, represents the really wide range of different services from AWS. So again, S3, Glacier, EBS volumes, Snowball for making it faster, transfer acceleration, storage gateway just to make the hybrid cloud, attaching your on-prem data center to AWS. Direct Connect, I actually briefly mentioned in one of my slides. So all these, like wide range of services allows us to store the data. But the tool that we can reach, the tool that we can actually select probably either CLI, SDK, or we may want to take a look at the third-party tools and integrations available from that network. So yeah, I think it's good time to go to questions since we have a few minutes left. Is there a way to schedule EBS snapshots to copy over to another region natively? I think you got to go. You need to look into a CLI, so that's gonna show you at least things available. But the scheduler, you may want to use something else, some kind of integration. So how do you do traditional backup for files on EC2 instance? Well, it depends, really. So you've seen one of the example, which is over AWS CLI, and I think it's all related to third-party tools, just in case if you want to make something more. Like, for example, if you want to work with incremental backup, if you want to work with all these like block level changes. If you don't really want to offload another full copy of the object, you may want to play with that third-party tools. Can you mention some of the third-party tools used to integrate and handle backups and restart on AWS? Well, I actually introduced myself on the very first slides. I worked for the company called CloudBerry Lab. We do backup solutions and file management solutions for AWS, so you may want to try. Do you restore individual DB from the RDS instance as part of native backup? Yes, you can. Interesting question. Is it possible to use AWS CLI to store on-prem virtual machines to AWS AMI, which is Amazon Machine Image, in an incremental manner? Well, CLI, no, because it does not recognize your changes within your VMDK files or VSD. Again, so having versioning enabled, and that really basic example of CLI file backup. So you're gonna get new file every time when you start that upload. So I would suggest you to look into your virtual infrastructure and maybe to have a look at the virtual tools, virtual machine backups, virtual machine backup tools. So there are plenty of them. You just need to figure out how to attach your AWS facilities to your on-prem, and again, that can be done over one of the technology that we have described today. A question: difference between data recovery for S3 and Glacier. Well, in S3 you actually retrieve data immediately unless they are kept in a Glacier storage class. But again, even today, having expedited retrieval mode for Glacier, I believe there is only pricing difference when you pay for number of requests and gigabytes that you retrieve. But if you use standard retrieval mode for Glacier, you may need to wait 3-5 hours just to get your data from the Glacier vault or from the S3 bucket with Glacier storage class enabled, and and that's gonna cost you some money. So in one of my slides I actually explained that. Okay, Diego, are you with me?
Yeah, Evgeny, thank you for the great presentation. Just to wrap up a little bit, everyone will be able to watch the session again at cloudacademy.com/webinars. We try to cover and answer most of the questions that you have been asking during the session. And if you have other questions, you can post it on cloudacademy.com/community, and we'll try to answer your doubts or point you out to additional resources. Thank you, Evgeny.
Yeah, thanks, Diego, very much, and thanks everyone for being with us today and for your really interesting questions. I really apologize if I haven't, answered some of the questions, but I promise that we're going to review those questions and we'll try to get back if possible. Right, Diego?
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Evgeny.
Yep.
So keep an eye on us in the next few weeks. We prepared a lot of interesting things for you guys, and keep an eye on our webinars for the next month. Thank you, Evgeny, again. It's been really a pleasure to having you today.
Absolutely. Thanks very much for hosting that for us, and thanks very much. Have a great week. Bye-bye.
All right, Diego here at Cloud Academy. Until next time, keep building amazing things on the cloud. Bye for now.